Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's IBM series webinar on securing your organization for the era of quantum. I'm Michael Downs. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Evolving Solutions. I'm extremely excited to have all of you join us today. Our speakers today are myself. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here, and joining me is Michael Jordan. He is an IBM Distinguished Engineer. He's got 30 years of experience, including 20 years of doing development, and 5+ years in a client-facing role working with large Z-scale projects. He's very passionate about security, cryptography, and parallel sysplex, one of the key pieces of reliability and stability on the Z platform. He also holds 20 patents and has been the co-author of several journal articles related to his work. So before we dive into today's topic, which I'm super excited about, it's an area that I have a deep interest in personally around quantum computing and cryptography. Let me give you a little bit of background on Evolving Solutions. So Evolving Solutions is a technology solution provider based in the upper Midwest, and we provide our help to our clients in modernizing and automating their mission critical applications. Really what we're focused on is something that we call modern operations. And so modern operations is really the process that we see our clients going through as they move from a traditional IT environment into this hybrid cloud world. And really at the core of what we do is helping our clients be able to deliver all the innovation that you get as you start adopting these new technologies like quantum and machine learning, AI, cloud. All of those things make your business more flexible and agile. They also create new cost profiles and new opportunities for the business. But one of the things that has always brought a challenge for the IT organization is making sure that we continue to make those things reliable, scalable, secure, available, and still actually deliver the value that the investment that the organization has made in all of that innovation. So we really divide it more or less into 4 large areas: data access and connectivity, pipelines and automation, which is a key piece of how new applications are deployed and how process works, protecting your data, which has changed radically as you move outside of a data center, and really observability. Where is my data? What's happening with it? Who's using my data? And is that the proper use of the data? Wrapping all of this in very important layer is security, and making sure that our clients have the best protection for their data, but also best protection for their business processes. So as they're working, as their high volume employees, as their customers are interacting with them, they have the experience that they expect, and they feel like they're getting the value that they expect to out of the business. And so today we've invited Michael Jordan to join us and dive into a little bit deeper on this topic of quantum computing and how it impacts cryptography and just in security in general. So thanks for joining us today, Michael. I appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Michael, for inviting me. I am happy to be here. And I think this topic dovetails very nicely with the modernization that you were just talking about. So by way of introduction, my name is Michael Jordan. I am, as Michael said, an IBM Distinguished Engineer, and I am also the Z Systems and Linux One Security CTO. And what does that mean? It means that I'm responsible for security for the IBM Z and Linux One platform. So I look at security from the processor, the firmware that runs on the processor, the hypervisors, the operating system, and the broader software stack. In doing that job, I work across IBM. I work with our colleagues in research to understand where innovation and technology is going. I work with our colleagues in IBM Security, and I work with our colleagues in IBM Cloud. And in addition to that, I work with the broader ecosystem, recognizing that it's not just enough for IBM products to support the platform, but we also need broad support for the ecosystem. So anything related to security is within my scope. And certainly along those lines and fit for today's discussion is what are the things that keep me up at night. So with that, let's jump right in, and we'll take you through the discussion. So a little bit of context for the discussion today. We're going to be talking about a new capability that we introduced with the Z16 around Quantum Safe. But before we jump into that, I want to kind of give you a little bit of a view of how we approach security for the platform, and the idea of our approach at a high level is we want to take advantage of the fact that we either own or contribute to large portion of the stack. So, as I was mentioning and describing my role, we own the processor, we own, the firmware, either own or contribute to the operating system, and we own large portions of the software stack. And from a security perspective, there's really two benefits to that. First is we can integrate solutions both horizontally and vertically, across the stack and up and down the stack. And we can identify the most effective place for security controls and put those controls in those most effective places. And when you look at what we've done from a security perspective over the last 3 generations, you're really kind of seeing, that approach come into light. So with Z14, our focus was on data protection, and we looked at it and said, okay, how do we help organizations protecting, data in flight and data at rest? And that's where we introduced with Z14 pervasive encryption. We made improvements to our crypto acceleration to enable encryption on an absolutely massive scale. And then we integrated encryption and monitoring kind of up and down the stack. With Z15, we shifted our focus to looking at data privacy and this idea of confidential computing. And confidential computing is focused on protecting data in use or data in memory. And then with Z16, we actually had 3 areas of focus. So first was around cyber resiliency, and understanding the challenges that organizations face, and not only protecting their system, but being able to recover from failures. And so we introduced capabilities around cyber resiliency. Continuous compliance, again, recognizing that compliance is a huge challenge for organizations and requires a significant amount of time. And then the third, which we're going to spend the rest of our session here today talking about, is around Quantum Safe. So with that, let's jump right in. So what's the goal for this today's discussion? First is want you to become aware of basically the risk of that quantum computers pose, understand what's being done across the industry. This is certainly not just something IBM is talking about, but what is the community doing and saying in this space? And lastly, what have we done with Z16, and how does this help you in this journey? So the first point is we are in fact entering a new cryptographic era. So there's kind of the theoretical, I would say, challenge, which is that quantum computers in principle can perform certain mathematical computations exponentially faster than classical computer. And I'll get into a little bit more detail of what we mean by this on the next slide. But the short view of this is there are algorithms that quantum computers are really good at solving and implementing that basically break some of the paradigms that we're relying on for security. And I say this is theoretical because as of today, quantum computers essentially don't have enough horsepower to apply these algorithms against the cryptography that we're using. But in the not so distant future, there will be a point in time where quantum computers do have that capacity. And in fact, there's been some recent developments. IBM at Think earlier this year kind of shared its roadmap to 2025 for quantum computing. And in there, they set out a plan to have a 4,000 plus qubit quantum computer by 2025. And what that means is we've got the industry's really first viable, for commercial use quantum computer. Now, That's not quite strong enough to break cryptography, but the message is, we're moving in that direction, and it is a matter of time. And I will spend a little bit more time talking about this reality and what the risks are. And then lastly is, your data and security is already at risk. So we are aware of the concept of harvest now and decrypt later. So state-sponsored actors are actually harvesting data today, and storing it, tucking it away, storing it away, with the expectation that at some point in the future they will be able to use a quantum computer to get at that information. And when you look at the lifespan of data, there's data that needs to exist for, in some cases, a decade, but in other cases it's multiple decades, and in some cases it's approaching 100 years where data needs to live. If we have data that has value over that period of time, we really need to be not just thinking about today, but thinking about protecting that data in the future as well. The other, I think, important aspect of this is we know it's going to take time for organizations to make this change. If you were around in the late 1990s, remember year 2K. I know I was around. I remember that. But now they're talking about this notion of Y2Q, which is years to quantum, and it's when do we need to have our cryptography changed out to using quantum safe cryptography before it's too late, right? So that's the idea of there. Okay, so that's sort of the backdrop. I do want to spend a little bit of time kind of explaining what breaks, because I think that's important in terms of making it real of what this quantum risk is. So we talked about on the previous page where there's kind of the theoretical challenge where there's algorithms that quantum computers can solve that can actually break the cryptography that we use. So a little bit on cryptography. So today, cryptography relies on, in a particular, asymmetric cryptography relies on the fact that there are some mathematical problems that are easy to solve in one direction, but are difficult to solve in the other direction. So, for example, RSA cryptography is based on factoring of large prime numbers, and it's if you start with two prime numbers and large prime numbers and you multiply them, multiplying them is easy, but having that that result and then trying to figure out without knowing what the two large prime numbers are, trying to factor that is a really difficult problem, and the whole security of RSA is based on the fact that factoring of large prime numbers is difficult to do. And then with elliptic curve, it's really about discrete logs, right? And so there are algorithms that quantum computers can use. So the first one is Shor's algorithm that provides exponentially faster methods for solving integer factorization that we talked about, as well as the discrete logarithm problem. And as soon as we get to a quantum computer with sufficient bits, we're going to go from taking millions of years for a conventional computer to solve these to being able to break them in hours. So that's sort of the reality that we're facing. And if you think about cryptography, and we'll talk a little bit about where cryptography is used, cryptography is the foundation for security across the board. So that the Shor's algorithm, that's around asymmetric cryptography, so things like RSA and elliptic curve. This is what's used as part of your TLS handshakes, for example. And then for symmetric cryptography, this is the cryptography we use for encrypting and protecting data, data at rest or data in flight. The good news there is there is an algorithm that's called Grover's algorithm that can speed up the search, but it can only do that by by 50%, or reduces the strength essentially to 50%. So when it comes to symmetric cryptography, there's no plan to replace the existing cryptography. The recommendation there is going to be to move to large key size, and this is kind of the impact here of that. So for things like triple DES and DES, those are no longer secure, because if you can reduce the strength by 50%, if you've got 64 bits or 128 bits, that's not sufficient if it gets cut in half. With AES, we have 256-bit keys. If I cut that in half to 128 bits, 128 bits is still considered strong, and so the recommendation is move to 256. So the other algorithms, so the asymmetric, so RSA and elliptic curve, as well as digital signature algorithms and the key agreement algorithms, those are no longer considered secure. Those will be broken. So what does that mean? As I mentioned before, cryptography is the foundation for security. So things like TLS, or SSL, require those for establishing a handshake. Any place we're using digital signatures or certificates, basically a cyber criminal will be able to basically manipulate and forge transactions through those either fraudulent authentication or fraudulent digital signatures. And asymmetric cryptography is also used for key distribution, so sharing of a symmetric key between two different parties. If you can crack the asymmetric cryptography that's used for that key agreement or key transport, you can now get at that symmetric key and actually decrypt that data as well. So that's where this notion of lost or harvested data comes into play. So again, I think you kind of get the view that this breaks a lot of the security that we look at and rely on and just implicitly trust today. So why do we care about this now? I think there's a couple of key reasons. First is, there's new attack vectors that didn't exist before. We know that for a fact that data is being stolen today with the intent of being able to leverage or to expose it in the future. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that this process is going to take a long time. So, and when we look at, I mentioned earlier that when it comes to data, what's the life cycle and lifespan of data? And if you look at across different industries, for healthcare, for example, there's requirements for data to exist for 25 years. Health records in Japan need to last for 100 years. Radiation records, 100 years. For financial services, tax records on the shorter end, 7 to 10 years. But then we have, trade secrets and, things like mortgages where they need to last for multiple decades. Government data. I think the most interesting thing that I've learned in this process is that war records actually have to last for 85 years, right? So when you look at, when you start looking at this and how long data has value, the reality is, we really need to start looking at this today. Okay, and that's the key message there is what are we going to do? So what is the industry? IBM is not alone in this. This is an industry challenge. So the National Institute for Standard Technology, NIST, has been looking at this problem since late 2015, early 2016, and they've been basically running a program to select the future algorithms for asymmetric cryptography. So this is things like digital signature algorithms, as well as key agreement mechanisms or key encapsulation mechanisms. Earlier this year, they actually, in July of this year, they announced the algorithms that they plan to standardize. And so what's shown on this page is For key encapsulation, they have chosen Crystal's Kyber, which is a lattice-based cryptographic algorithm. And for digital signatures, the primary one is Crystal's Dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx. But they also announced that they're planning to do a round 4 to identify additional signature schemes. So for the algorithms that you see on this page, they have started the standardization process, and so basically they're documenting, the standard for this. Once that happens, or kind of in parallel to that, we also expect organizations like IETF that define, the SSL and TLS protocols to adopt these algorithms, and from NIST, we'll see them kind of ripple across the industry. It's important to note, I mentioned before that I work very closely with IBM Research. IBM Research actually was a key part in developing the Crystals suite of algorithms, so Crystals Kyber and Crystals Dilithium, and kind of have been part of this selection process with NIST. Just a little bit more information in terms of the cryptographic algorithms that have been selected for standardization. As I mentioned before, Crystal's Dilithium is considered the primary digital signature algorithm, and Crystal's Kyber is at this point in time the only key encapsulation mechanism. And this is just a little bit more information for reference in terms of the standardization process that will take place from here going forward. So that's what's happening from the industry. We also see that other other organizations like BSI are moving forward with their own processes, very similar to what NIST is doing. But a lot of organizations kind of wait and see what NIST does, and kind of take and adopt the standard from NIST. With Z16, we have introduced what we're calling the industry's first quantum safe system. And what we mean by that is there's actually 3 elements to this. The first is in terms of the server itself. So the machine itself. What we did is, we basically looked at places within the system where we're using cryptography. There are places where cryptography is used without, it being enabled or requested by, the user or the consumer of that server. For example, when a IBM Z server or Z system server boots up, it will go through and validate all the firmware as it's being loaded. And this is what we refer to as secure boot. And so with the Z16, any places internally where we're using cryptography, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, the details of this, but we've changed it to using quantum safe cryptography. So that's the first piece. This is enabled by default. So if you buy an IBM Z16 and bring it onto your floor, it will automatically start using quantum safe cryptography for its internal purposes, without you having to explicitly enable it. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that works, and how you're protected both today and in the future. The second thing that we focused on was providing the cryptographic algorithm support. So we've enhanced our Crypto Express card to support Crystal's Dilithium and Crystal's Kyber algorithms. And we've surfaced those APIs so that organizations can start changing their own applications using these cryptographic APIs. And then the third is around what we're calling creating a cryptographic inventory. And what does this mean? What is this about? When I first started talking about the Z16, I mentioned, we had to change places internally where we have and are using cryptography. The first step of that process for us was to go discover all the places within the system that we're using cryptography and create a crypto inventory. And why this is important is this is really the first step that organizations have to do in understanding and planning for, making changes. So, you create the crypto inventory. From there you can understand how is that crypto being provided. Is it an algorithm that's in place, or is it using a piece of software, a piece of hardware? Identify the dependencies, understand when those dependencies can be fulfilled, and identify what potential standards come into play, and from that crypto inventory, really building a plan and understanding how long it's going to take you to get from point A, which is using entirely classical cryptography, to point B, which is using quantum safe cryptography. And until you've done this, and until you know what that plan looks like, there's no way for you to understand when you're going to be able to achieve this, right? So I think this is absolutely imperative for everyone to do. And I'll talk a little bit about the tooling that we're providing to help organizations with this task. So I'll kind of go through each of those in a little bit more detail. So first is around the intrinsic capabilities. So I mentioned a little bit more information on the secure boot. So basically, thinking about supply chain integrity, right? How do you know that the code that you're running is trusted and is the code that you expect to be running? When we ship firmware for our hardware, it's all digitally signed and has to be validated. Today, that validation is done using classical cryptography. So for the system to be considered quantum safe, we also have to digitally sign our code with quantum safe cryptography and validate the code with quantum safe cryptography. But there's a little bit more to it than that, in that one of the things that we needed to do is make sure that our systems are secure today and in the future. And if you think about when we first started with the Z16, as of today, the quantum safe it's not officially standardized. It's been crystals Kyber and crystals dilithium have been selected for standardization, but they're not actually standardized. So what we've done is we've actually used a dual signature scheme to do this validation, where we're signing the code with both classical cryptography and with quantum safe cryptography. And what this does is it gives us the security of both of those. So we know that the standardized cryptography, elliptic curve, we're using that, and we're augmenting that with the quantum safe. So you can't break the system unless you can break both of those. So we're protected with today's standards as well as the future standards. And that's kind of the net of what we're talking about here as well. In terms of what we've done with that second pillar around the cryptographic, providing cryptographic capabilities, the focus here is on our Crypto Express card. This is what's known as a hardware security module. The current version of that is the Crypto Express 8S. That's the latest and greatest of that. And so this card has been updated in a number of ways to be considered quantum safe. The first step of that process is, just like our Z16 server, there's firmware that runs within the Crypto Express. So we had to use a similar dual signing mechanism to validate that firmware as it's being loaded. And then also we've made changes to things like TKE to make sure that we have quantum, secure communications are also quantum safe. And then in terms of the cryptographic algorithms, there are crystals Kyber and crystals dilithium signature algorithms that are available, as well as the APIs. You might be asking or curious about pervasive encryption and whether that's considered to be quantum safe. When we first designed pervasive encryption back in the Z14 timeframe, the quantum safe was already on our radar back then. one of the decisions that we made was not to give organizations a choice of whether to use what encryption algorithm to use. We said, that the only option is 100 or 256-bit AES. So we didn't give the option of using triple DES or give the option of using 128-bit. So as a result of that decision, the encryption that we're using, AES 256, is considered quantum safe, and our internal key handling also uses a 256-bit key to protect those keys. So, if those are the mechanisms you're relying on, that's also considered quantum safe. So that's the view of our Crypto Express. Here's a little bit more details in terms of the algorithms and the APIs that we're providing for applications. And you can see we have the ability of doing generation for quantum safe keys. We have the ability of doing dual signatures and hybrid key exchange mechanisms. So all the capabilities that we're kind of using internally, we've surfaced. We also have key management that supports dilithium and Kyber as part of our EKMF solution. And then lastly, around the crypto inventory, as I mentioned before, this was the first step in the process when we were building and designing the Z16, and will be the first step of the process for organization. Just to kind of reinforce, if you have a Z16, that doesn't mean you've solved all of your challenges around quantum safe across the enterprise. There's still additional work that you need to do to basically understand where and how cryptography is being used across the system. And to help you do that within the Z environment, there's a number of tools that can really help in this space. The first is we have our IBM Application Discovery and Delivery Intelligence solution. This has actually been enhanced to do static scanning of your code to identify places where you're using cryptographic algorithms, and providing kind of a view of that, as well as the metadata. We've also enhanced our dynamic crypto usage tracking. So another capability that Z16 offers is we now have a number of new crypto counters that identify the cryptographic algorithms being used within the server, so that you can get precise counts by an application by application basis, and understanding dynamically where and how crypto is being used across the system. So these first two tools, one gives you a static view of what your application is doing. The other gives you a dynamic view of how cryptography is actually being used within the environment, and to kind of use these two in combination. There could be, and why this is important is there could be places where cryptography is being used implicitly, a piece of software that you're running from a third party, it's not part of your application. So getting headlights and awareness of this, you can go talk to that third party and say, hey, we're looking at moving to quantum safe. We see your application or software is using this cryptography. What are your plans for making changes to that? So that gives you that visibility. We also have the crypto analytics tool. This really kind of looks at cryptography from a key management point of view, which is, hey, where are all the cryptographic keys I have, and being able to evaluate and understand the different types of cryptographic keys, and what applications are using those. And then the last one is around understanding your network security. So our Z encryption readiness technology that we introduced as part of Z14 with pervasive encryption also gives you visibility into the type of cryptography you're using as part of your network security. So it'll tell you, session by session, what protocol you're using, if it's TLS 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, which cryptographic algorithms have been selected, whether it's elliptic curve or RSA or AES, and give you a complete view of your network security. And that could indicate whether you have to change an application and or potentially change a configuration option. So using these all in combination gives you a pretty good perspective on what you need to change within your Z environment and start that first step of the process. So for reference, I've included a number of different guidance resources that you can use. So there's an IBM Red Book on Quantum Safe. Feel free to use that. NIST has also created the National Cybersecurity Center. Well, it didn't create it, it's existed, but they started a migration to post-quantum cryptography project. That's the third column in here in the middle of the page. That is actually IBM is participating in that, and Z Systems is actually going to be part of this whole project. And really, this is focused on the part of the process that the discovery and creating a crypto inventory aspect of it. The National Cybersecurity Center has a reference on preparing for quantum safe. And then there's also information out there from the Cloud Security Alliance, and then ETSI also has some information on quantum safe and migration to quantum safe. So suggest if you're looking at this, or your organization is looking at this, use these references. There's a lot of really good information out there. So what are organizations saying in terms of quantum safe? So, NIST, for example, starting with NIST, they'd say you need to start the planning process now. And I hopefully from, what I've shared, you understand that. BSI, which is an EU organization, they're also saying start the process now, as well as the NCSC. So, everyone is urging that. A couple of weeks ago, or probably closer to a month ago, NSA actually came out with what they're calling the Commercial National Security Algorithms Suite 2.0. If you remember back in the elliptic curve days, NSA came out with something they're calling Sweet B. So basically, they're saying we can't wait. We have to start the process, and they've actually set a 2035 deadline for adoption of post-quantum cryptography. And if you look on the left-hand side of this page, even though the deadline is 2035, there's a lot of interim deadlines that are really in the near future. And if NSA is suggesting this, they probably have good reason for this. I don't know what it is, but that would be my point of view. So to wrap up, right? We talked about what we're going to learn at the beginning of this, which is what is the challenge we face and the quantum risk that we're facing. I think we kind of laid that out and articulated that. What is Z16 providing in terms of helping you, and then what is the rest of the industry saying about this? So we kind of covered all those. Hopefully, that gives you a much better understanding of the problem and what the process and path forward looks like. And with that, Mike, I'll turn it back to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Greatly appreciate your time today. I found this incredibly fascinating. I think it's definitely a watershed moment in security industry, and that certainly I think we've both been in the industry for about the same time. And this is
Sure.
definitely something that's a whole different food. And as usual, IBM's got sort of a lead on how they are going to address a challenge that's relevant to all the businesses that we work with together. So
yeah, I mean, it is kind of cool, and I'm proud of the fact that Z is in a leadership role here, right? I mean, that's when we started this process probably 6 years ago, right? And recognizing the challenge and understanding the role that Z plays. My point of view was we had to be in a position of leadership. We couldn't take a back seat here.
yeah, absolutely. That's one of the great things I've always appreciated about IBM is you got the innovation to create something like a quantum computer that gives us a great opportunity, but also to immediately see that there's a challenge that goes with it, and how do you help a business address that? So another shining example of really IBM's thought leadership and research in this space. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This was, I thought it was a really fantastic webinar. If you would like to talk more about quantum safe cryptography, or Z, or any other areas in modern operations, we'd be more than happy to discuss that with you. You can reach out to Scott Rodin, who is our Z contact here at Evolving Solutions, or just reach out to info@evolvingsol.com. We'd be happy to connect with you.